All right, good morning all. This morning and today we're going to have a bit of a chat with Dr. Michael Clements. And before we get to Michael, I just want to give a bit of a rundown about the reason that we're doing that. This relates to the floods in Townsville around about a year ago. And what I'm going to read you now is from the Townsville, the government website that relates to Townsville. In late January and early February of 2019, Townsville local government area experienced an unprecedented weather event. The 2019 weather event was the largest rainfall event to have occurred over the Townsville catchment in the past 120 years. To put this into perspective, over the course of 2019 weather event, the Ross River Dam received 850 megalitres of rainfall, 3.8 times the RRD's capacity. Based on hydrological analysis that has subsequently been conducted, RRD experienced rainfalls and flood volumes over a 7-day period from the 29th of January to the 5th of Feb, which exceeded a 1 in 1,000 year event. That means that every year there is a 1 in 1,000 chance of this type. That means every year there is a 1 in 1,000 chance of this type of event occurring. Throughout the event, rainfall was measured at historic highs, and the level of water in the RRD exceeded the greatest flood on record, peaking at 43 metres and a capacity of 247%. The event was exceptional between 25th of January and 14th of February, with 39 local government areas affected by the monsoon trough and significant rainfall and flooding. In late January and early February 2019, the Townsville local government area experienced an unprecedented weather event. All right, I'll move to the next bit. So what we can assume from that, Michael, is and I just wanted to put the details in there from the official website, just to give everyone else an idea about what it was like. But I'm going to hand off to you, and you can talk a little bit about where you're comfortable kicking off from in that kind of period of time.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I guess, listening to those statistics and, reflecting on how much of an event it was for us, I still think to myself now, at least it wasn't a fire like they're getting down south. So I think as bad as it was for us, I think the Southerners are dealing with a lot worse scenarios right now. But I guess it's interesting that rain event occurred off the back of quite a long period of drought. So we'd been on quite severe water restrictions in the lead up to that time. Right. And so for the first few days of, and even a week of heavy rain and constant rain, actually we were praising it and very pleased. And it only sort of evolved slowly over the few days that it was actually going to turn into a bigger event. So a lot of excitement turned to a bit of complacency, and then it turned into a, oh my gosh, what are we going to do now moment as the couple of days of heavy rain progressed.
Yeah, so, I can only imagine there was loss of life, of course, in this event, amongst a lot of tragedy.
Yeah, so I think the scale is the thing that affected us. So it was it was actually a tale of two cities. So Townsville's quite a big city, and there were suburbs immensely affected. People, sitting on their roofs waiting to be rescued at night. People being rescued by boats out their windows, calling OOO, waiting 3 or 4 hours for responses. But on the other hand, there are other parts of Townsville that was totally unaffected. I remember I got picked up from my house in an army truck to go and staff an evacuation centre as a GP, just to help them sift and sort through some of the people asking for medical help, leaving the flood watered streets around my house, and then driving through perfectly dry, normal parts of the city where it was business as usual with all the shops, into an evacuation centre, which was essentially again back into a disaster zone. A stadium or basketball stadium full of people with just the shirts on their backs. It was quite remarkable.
Wow. Yeah, that must be something. Maybe as part of this, Michael, I might get you just to talk a little bit about your other hats. I know you're aware of many hats. Just to add a little bit of context to your experience running into this.
Yeah. So after trying out my life as a business analyst and within my economics degree, I joined the Air Force for a bit of excitement as a doctor. and with the military for 13 years as a permanent doctor, we certainly trained for disaster zones. So, you know, everything from a Masters of Public Health and disaster subjects to evacuation zones, setting up field hospitals. And in my military work, I did deploy overseas to all sorts of interesting places. And we were well trained in how to respond to a flood event, but normally flying in our Hercs or C-17s in the days afterwards. So certainly, I guess, an awareness of what was going on was there. And also I had been director of medical service at Ingham Hospital after my Air Force time, and then a medical director at Townsville Hospital. And actually, as part of my roles there, we would regularly review the disaster management plan. So as a hospital administrator, every year we'd sort of go through. So I actually, leading into this, I already had quite a good academic understanding of what to expect. So everything from how local government councils, you know, took control versus state and federal responses, but also being ex-military, I knew that we had the Laverack Army base here, and I guess I sort of knew what to expect, which gave me a bit of an opportunity to, you know, predict and plan what our own family's response would be. Because, you know, as a family, we were making decisions. You know, do we evacuate our house? But what do I do with my 4 kids? Where do we stay? Is it safer just to stay at home? We had 2 floors in our house, so we always felt safe that we could isolate ourselves. And we did make the decision to stay. And then we were trapped, surrounded by floodwaters, and it kept climbing during the night, and things got worse and worse, and we ended up being a bit of a refuge. Family and neighbours knocking on the door at night in the rain, saying that their house is starting to flood, they can't get out. SES and police, they were calling 000, 3 or 4 hours of waiting for a boat to come and rescue them at night. Didn't occur, so we went out and fetched some people in the middle of the night because their 000 calls were going unheeded, and we had our little island of safety. So we had 17 people in our house that night, all stretched out across the floor, waiting to see what would happen. But thankfully, we're all safe. And yeah, there were 2 lives lost. They were people that were out at night, very sadly, and you know, I guess we're just lucky there wasn't more, because, you know, talking to my patients in the aftermath, I've got people that were literally on their roofs waiting to be rescued. There were people wading through water to higher ground because it happened so suddenly, that could have easily been taken out. There's famous photos of crocs actually being in the floodwater and climbing up some driveways, and so I think it's a real blessing that we didn't lose any lives.
Yeah, good.
I guess reflecting on the fires, I think, you know, we're so lucky that it wasn't that kind of personal danger that they faced down there.
Yep, absolutely. At the time of the event, I guess, you know, very different experiences, but in the end, what happens is, you know, damage to a lot of property, assets, resources, and I know, you know, from just a very you know, lateral experience, if you like, but just being in Melbourne, it seemed to be a place that a lot of you know, people who departed Christchurch following the earthquakes seemed to move to Melbourne. And you know, there was a group of people who just said, I'm not going back, like I'm not interested in trying this again, and just sort of packed up and off afterwards. You know, it can be extremely traumatic.
Yeah, it's interesting. So being Townsville, being a Townsville resident for almost 10 years now, we know that this is a cyclone-prone area. So we willingly and knowingly have set up shop in an area where there's cyclones. But, you know, over the last 10 years, and we've had a few cyclones, but they're a bit more predictable. So we can risk manage, and depending on the size of the cyclones, we respond. So, you know, if there's a category 5 headed straight towards us, we normally get several days warning, and families make a decision as to pack up and leave and, you know, move inland or down south, or fly out. Or to stay and fight. And, you know, every residence, including ours, is, you know, made to withstand a category 5 cyclone, but, you know, there's always breaking glass and things like that. So I guess we're sort of aware of disasters, and every year we get great publicity, great support from the council. Check your disaster plan, make sure you've got batteries, make sure you've got all these things. So we're a disaster-ready city, to be honest, but we weren't ready for this. This was not what we were expecting. We haven't faced it before. The oldies in town will certainly talk about previous floods, Night of Noah and some of the bigger ones. But I guess there was a complacency that wouldn't happen again because the dam was new. So the dam was actually built not as a water catchment, apparently. It was mainly built as a flood mitigation. Obviously, you can't compete against a 1 in 500 or 1 in 1,000 year event, but so there was certainly a complacency against flood. So we were aware. So and a lot of my residents talk about, I can handle one, but if there's a second one, I'm going. And they say the same thing about cyclones. So I've had a lot of patients that have been through a nasty cyclone, or might have been severely affected by Yazi, for example. And their words are something along the lines of, listen, we recovered from that and we dealt with that and we coped with that. But if there's another one, that's it. I'm gone. Right. And people are saying exactly the same thing about the floods. Listen, it was a one-off, 1 in 1,000 year. It was nasty. We responded and recovered. We're still committed to the town. But tell you what, if there's another one, we're gone. Okay. And so I guess I wonder whether those people that you talk about in Christchurch, what was their life experience before that event? Because I guess the doctor in me and the rationalist in me says, well, you can run away from one disaster zone where a disaster happened, like Christchurch or Townsville. But, I would have thought places like Mollymook and Ulladulla and, the snowy mountains, they, a year ago, if you'd asked them about the risk to them, they would have, given you a different risk prediction that they will if you ask them the same question now. So I think we're just living, especially with climate instability, climate change. I think, we all have to rethink individual risks to us. I think that's what the floods certainly did for us as a family, was readjust our risk awareness. And I think given the fires that are going down south and people that have never experienced anything like this, I think there's going to be a national readjustment of vulnerability on an individual level.
Absolutely. You're right. Look, at the end of the day, mate, California is I think by itself like the third or fourth biggest economy in the world, precariously located along the San Andreas Fault. So humans have a propensity to sort of say, well, you know what, I think I can manage those risks and live in that area. As you say, some things you can plan for and other things you can't. And I think it's the ones that come out of left field that are always going to shake us up the most. It might be useful just to walk through. There's often layered responses, and I think there's a lot of hats that you wear in this in a disaster and the immediate post-disaster time. And I just wonder if you could build a little bit on the impact on those layers that I've got there, family, social, clinic and doctor. And of course, there's another one which is personal that feel free to share as much or as little as you like there. And I don't necessarily mean about your family, but just the impact on families.
So in the lead up to the big, the flood event or the big day, which is actually the anniversary is today and tomorrow. Exactly 12 months on. So, this time 12 months ago, I was still complacent, didn't feel vulnerable. We thought everything was going fine. Yes, there was an awful lot of rain. We were reassured by flood mitigation measures. There's a channel out the front of us that's supposed to divert water. We, are on the Q100. Our ground is Q100, but our house was built up as high as we legally were above that. So I was very complacent this time last year. So at the time that these floodwaters were rising and people were starting to be evacuated from their houses at other parts of Townsville, my focus was on the social recovery and social response. And so I got a call. We are well prepared for disasters, as I said, in Townsville. So my name's on a list, as is other GPs, for if the hospital needs you, will you step up? And I, of course, said yes. I'm used to that in the military, so it was a no-brainer. I got a call Sunday morning saying, listen, we need a GP at the evacuation centres. We can't bring everybody up to the hospital that says that they need to see a doctor. And we realise that you've got the skills, GPs have got the skills to sift and sort and go through the unclean masses and decide who needs to see us and who doesn't. And sometimes it's just simple things about, I need my little white pill. And then you find out that the little white pill's a cholesterol tablet and versus warfarin. So GPs are the ones that can do that kind of decision making. So the social aspect was what was the first one. And so I got a call saying, can you help? And of course, I want to help. It was that afternoon where I was actually at the evacuation centre, and one of my friends in the disaster centre called me and said, listen, where do you live? And I said, oh, here. And I said, oh, we'll be all right. And I said, well, actually, no, we don't think you will be. And then within that, a heartbeat, my attention and my focus turned from serving my society and delivering what care I could to I need to look after my family. And that was a very quick switch, and that was only because of the connections from the hospital and the people that I knew. And literally, and I said to the SES, I need to get back home. They said, no, we can't even get you there. And I said, no, you don't understand. I'm going home. I've got 4 kids and a wife in a house. I'm going. Yeah. And so the police were at the evacuation centre, and I was friendly with one of them and said, listen, I need to get home. They said, don't worry, Doc, we'll get you there. So they found the tallest truck possible, and they drove me within 250 metres of the house, which was as close as they could get. And I just waited the rest of the way home. Wow. So I woefully underestimated my own family's risk early on. So for me, and certainly for the other residents, that the next phase, so the 3 days phase, was a focus on my own family aspects. We lost electricity, we lost sewage, water thankfully stayed on, but peeing off the balcony because the toilets don't flush, that kind of thing. Teaching the kids that it's okay to do that.
Later.
That's right. So the focus very much for the next few days was I need to look after my family, and that's a paternal thing. It's a maternal thing as well. And we really, that became the absolute massive focus. My son's got type 1 diabetes. Making sure the insulin was saved. That what was my plan if he had a severe hypo? Making sure that if we did have to evacuate to the top floor of the house, did we have all of the medical equipment that we need? And the thing is, people often, in retrospect, people might say, well, you should have just evacuated. But, you're a big family. Where do you evacuate to? All these hotels and apartments had already been filling up. Do you really want to sleep on the floor of a friend? And so, we made the decision to stay. We were trapped by the floodwaters. There was a lot of calm the next day. The floodwaters had stopped rising, but they stayed there. We were an island as a house. The boats were going past with regular recurrence. We called a friend who had a boat. He came and picked up most of the 17 squatters that we had that night and took them out, took them back to sort of a safe place. And we just sort of sat it out. And then, to be honest, as a family, we're pretty safe. We were disaster prepared. We had plenty of food. We had water backup. We'd filled up all of our water receptacles. We said no. We actually, because the boats did come past. We were an island. We actually had to hang up a sign out the front on a sheet saying "We are okay." Just because we didn't need everybody to stop off and ask us if we needed anything. We actually were saying, "No, go and find somebody else that needs." We're quite self-sufficient. And then it turned into, I became very selfish after that. I said, what do I do about my clinic? That's my main source of income. My staff need to be paid. We're not getting any income for a while. I suspect, given where the floodwaters have gone, how on earth am I going to pay the bills, pay my staff, and financially recover from this? So, that became the next focus after this, sort of for the week after that. And then, in the months after that, then it became, stabilising the practice and looking after my staff and my staff's welfare. And then when am I ready to start helping my community again? So my patients, my residents, the people that trusted us for their general practice care. I think at the time we had about 10,000 people registered to our practice. What can we do to support them? And that's, being long-term and still ongoing in terms of how do we respond. Because there's an interesting thing that the fact that our practice was flooded, people, I was active in the media. People knew that my own house was damaged, lost cars, and we've got another house in the same suburb because we think it's a good suburb that flooded. I think that connection of the patients knowing that I'd been through the same thing that they had was a key for them to unlock in themselves a discussion with me. So people were hanging out to see me. So I eventually went back to work. I needed a bit of time to recover my own energy levels. People just wanted to talk. And the fact that they knew that I'd been through the same thing allowed them to talk about their fears and what happened, because what they were telling everybody else, oh, no, we'll be fine. See Joe next door, he's a lot worse off than me. Or, Aussies have that great way of saying, yeah, it's pretty crap, but you should see the fella next door.
Yep.
But I think as the GP and as somebody that knew them and that they knew me, really, I'm the kind of GP that has relationships with my patients, like most of us do. And we just connected. And so, you just give them permission to say that they're upset, permission to say that they're stressed. And, a lot of them felt, it was pretty consistent. A lot of them felt that they shouldn't complain because there were those that were worse off. But in the consult room, in with the GP that knew them and had been through the same thing, we enabled them to say, what, you're allowed to be upset and stressed, even though, the next door is much worse off than you. It's okay for you to still be upset and worried about that.
One thing I was going to just touch on there, Michael, if I may, psychologists do this really well. They kind of have a buddy that they can regularly meet with and unpack. And this sounds like a time of, general practice can be, spirit heavy, and it can be task heavy, and it can be very decision dense. This sounds like a very spirit heavy time. How did you manage the kind of the offloading, sharing stuff outwards? Because it sounds like a lot of people were, I'm not going to use the word dumping, but they were sharing pretty heavy burdens with you.
Yeah, good. I'll go back to your I like your term decision dense. I became very well aware of my decision-making limits. So, the concept that there's only so many decisions I can make in a 24-hour period before I lose it. And literally, I did, make millions of decisions each day. And sometimes I just had to pull over to the side of the road while I was driving just to catch up in my mind and say, right, okay, let's park that and move on to the next one. I'm talking about little decisions, like when I went into the flooded practice. Can I save the ECG machine? It was above the flood level, but the framing was below. Am I likely to be able to get a replacement for the framing? Can I trust an ECG machine that's been sitting there, in that humidity? And if a patient comes and sees me 6 months from now and sees a spot of mud on that ECG machine, are they going to, lose trust in the quality? Are they, going to think that I just used old equipment? So, and millions of decisions like that when I walked into practice, all the way through to how do I pay my staff members? As you may know, under disaster provisions, if a practice loses, or if a small business loses its basically its capacity to work in a catastrophe, there's no unfair dismissal. So. Okay. Yeah, so, I got legal advice. I talked to AMA legal team just to get an idea of where I was as a business owner. But of course, you don't want to terminate anybody. So at a time that everyone's pretty vulnerable, right? So connected, closely connected to these communities that you work in. So that would be hard. That's right. You don't want to cause secondary trauma to them. The trauma of the floods was one thing. Secondary trauma is if you've got to terminate them because you can't afford to pay them. So I certainly faced decision-making fatigue and was overwhelmed. And so pretty darn quickly. So I had a wonderful brains trust of friends and close friends and confidants who were the first on the phone to call me to see how I'm doing. So Nicole and Bruce flew up into Townsville almost as soon as they could, just to be with me, just to be there. And as you know, you and Bruce and Nicole formed a part of a brains trust, and that was invaluable in terms of just having a group of people that I could just share some of the decision making with. So, for example, using that ECG example, there's a lot of internal thought and energy that goes into each decision about what do I discard and what do I keep. Having a group of people around you who you trust to just chew through that with you and say, yep, that's a good idea, no, that's not. That actually takes off an immense amount of pressure off a business owner. So everything from my staffing, I ran through this brains trust, through to rebuilding and what do I do? What do I do with my registrars? I mean, the decisions weren't hard itself, and in normal circumstances as a business owner, I make those kinds of decisions every day. The sheer volume was overwhelming, and so that brains trust and the regular chats and the phone calls with you and Nicole and Bruce, just being able to offload some of that dense decision making time was immensely valuable. And it took me some while, so but it did take me a while to be prepared for, and I was forced into it. You have to make decisions. That you can't sit there and not make decisions.
Yeah, you can't defer them. That's another decision you just have to keep track of, isn't it? So
that's right. But the spirit heavy stuff, I knew it was coming, and I wasn't. I was still, I wasn't, suffering a disorder, but I was certainly overwhelmed by the decision making that was going on, and so I didn't feel I was ready to return to the spirit heavy work of general practice. So it did take me a good month or so before I was ready to start dealing with the spirit heavy consults, which I knew were coming because I'd already been talking to some people. And as I've said in other forums too, the thing that really helped me, was a light bulb moment, was actually when I did return to work, those first few days of consults where I was expecting patients to come and offload to me, was actually patients coming to check on me and let me offload to them. There was a waiting list of people saying, well, as soon as Michael comes back, please give me a call. And so the first few days were all my long-term regulars who may have been affected themselves and maybe not. But the first few days were absolutely people bringing me chocolate and scotch. And, I remember there was a Cadbury cream eggs, for example, somebody just brought in a box of them. And I thought, how did you know that I eat Cadbury cream eggs? Oh, 2 years ago, I remember you had one on your desk and you said you liked them. So, when we're coming in to see you, we thought, what can we give you that we know that you like? So,
yeah.
That was quite emotionally overwhelming and appreciated. But then, after a few days, of course, then the spirit heavy work started.
Yep.
So it wasn't really, I'm certainly, mental health's not something I'm afraid of, but I wasn't really prepared for it. So I did actually look out for ways to equip myself. And so I got chummy with a psychologist that I'm friendly with, I started debriefing with. And then I did the focused psychological skills training, not because I thought that there was a Medicare bucket of money that I was going to finally be able to tap into. It was more just to equip myself with, well, what do you do when people just offload and aren't coping? What can I do as a GP? I mean, if you believe the textbooks, the GP should diagnose the disorder, do a suicide risk assessment, give them an antidepressant, refer them to a psychologist. Well, that ain't appropriate after a disaster, because not everybody wants to see the psychologist. They just want to see you. They don't want to be, everybody else is worse off than me, so I shouldn't be seeing a psychologist, So I found that psychological skills training really prepared me, and I've always been grateful for that ever since.
Okay. And you just set aside some time to do that. Was that an online course or?
Yeah, it was good timing actually. So I think the RSCGB Rural actually just came out with it. I'm not sure, but it certainly caught my attention for obvious reasons. But it was an online, so it was a mix of readings, which I just fitted in, a mix of online sort of this kind of thing, Zoom meetings or Skype meetings with groups of other doctors in training and a senior mentor, and then a little bit of written work, audits of your own prescribing behaviour and doing a retrospective and then a prospective audit of how you treat different disorders. And so it took several months, but everything was gold. Everything I was learning, every bit about, principles of cognitive behavioural therapy, all those things just helped me be better equipped when the patient came in and offloaded.
Okay. Hey, could I just invest a little bit of time with you just to unpack the Brains Trust kind of idea, and let's for a moment just ignore the actual people you had. And this is really about advice to other people. Did you think during that time that you needed to segment and get advice for certain areas, or did you need certain personalities, or just walk me through how you would recommend somebody else did it?
Yeah, so I think. So anybody facing a similar thing, and certainly for the fireys down south, I think you need to, normally there's no shortage of people offering help, to be honest. And I certainly, I had offers of help from people I've never met before that offered very generous things like, listen, Michael, I'll come from, Perth, and I'll work for you for a month for free. I don't need any money, but I just want to help you out. And I'd never met this person. I knew of them, but I never met them.
Wow.
And I certainly had a good close group of friends through my RACGP Rural Council, all of whom who called up and said, what can we do? In typical Aussie fashion, I said, no, I'll be fine. but occasionally I said yes. So I did have some wonderful people actually fly in, had some old GP friends work out of my clinics, because I needed somebody to see my patients. I needed money to keep coming into the because I had a backup practice.
Yep.
And so I needed help. And it took me a while, but eventually I said yes. So I think for people in similar situations, number one, you need to actually say, yes, I would like some help to a certain extent. In terms of compartmentalizing, so there were different aspects. Every day had a different challenge. So some of it was logistics and, just technical aspects of payroll and provider numbers. And I've just moved everybody from site A to site B. What do I need to, tell Medicare? And so just getting people that in that brains trust that who understand some of the technicalities around moving. Because, for example, I don't know if people know, but Medicare actually allows you to use your existing provider number in an emergency off-site for a period, I think it's 2 or 3 weeks, without actually having to change anything. But it could be paralysing to you if you didn't know that. So there's all these kinds of things where you do want somebody who's got a good Medicare understanding, good bit of legal understanding. Banking is a big thing. So it took me a while to get good banking advice, but essentially all of the banks have disaster provisions. And so with a couple of phone calls, I was able to get all of my credit card repayments, all of my home loans, all of my business loans paused for 3 months. Now that's an immense benefit. I mean, they're still going to charge you interest. Don't worry, they'll get their own back.
Of course.
But in terms of cash flow, just knowing, I didn't know that was an option. So just knowing, so having, financial people around, whether that's accounting to say, hey, listen, by the way, don't forget to call these people and get those things paused, because you might not think of that. When you're in dense decision-making territory or decision-making fatigue, your creativity goes. So you're thinking outside the box goes. You lose that. When you're refreshed and caffeinated and hydrated and not stressed and had a good night's sleep, your creativity to think of novel solutions is wonderful. In a situation like this, you just need people around you that have got that creativity, because you're not going to have it. And you do need a little bit of a welfare check person. So in my brains trust included people that care about, actually, know me, care about me and my family, and check in with that. And I needed one of them in particular, who's got a connection with my wife, and knew that they'd check in on her, and that my wife could call her if there was any problems, in terms of my own psychological well-being. So you've got to have somebody looking after that side, and checking in on you, making sure you're not turning to alcohol or turning to avoiding. Because I have to say, one of the things I never thought I'd find myself doing was actually, there were certainly days where I felt I wanted to be avoidant of decision making. There's so much going on, and sometimes I just wake up and I just don't want to think anymore. And you could probably get away with that for a little while, but you know what? Sometimes you just got to buck up and push on. And I guess it was talking about that. My awareness of psychological illness and post-traumatic stress disorder enhanced in this. In the deepest, darkest, hardest work periods of post-flood, my mind was taking me back to some of my stuff in Afghanistan and the release when I was with the military. So some trauma that I was exposed to, that I dealt with at the time, that I thought I'd parked, that I rationalised and dealt with, and we all get post-deployment counselling when we return. I hadn't been an issue for me, but all of a sudden, in the midst of decision making about ECG machines, for example, all of a sudden I get actually a flashback to some of the patients I treated, kids I treated in the release. So that was a shock to me. It was a real shock, and so that was when I called up my friendly psychologist, and I'm telling you, they said, "Why did this happen?" And she said, "Oh no, that's a thing." She talks about sometimes when you're experiencing a certain stress or feeling, it opens up parts of your brain that had previously closed, and a trauma-linked, it's got a name, trauma-linked memories or something. And so, to be honest, my own experience there, I didn't get into a full disorder I was still functioning, but it certainly gave me a better awareness for my own patients of how, all of a sudden, your response to the current events is compounded by what you've experienced in your previous life, even though you thought you'd sort of dealt with it. So in terms of getting back to your question about the brains trust, so you need people that understand finance, you need people that understand Medicare and Medicare rules, you need a friend that's there with the welfare, and you need people that don't question you. So, Michael, why are you asking me about, payroll tax? You should know that. That's not the kind of person you want in your brains trust. You just need somebody that says, yep, here's what you do.
Right. So the personality is important. It's about them just being there to support and help at the time and not worry about, because what you're saying is it's a time that you can't deliver at your best, so you don't need somebody kind of lecturing you about that.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So it's and that's why you can't. Different groups, and I can see it happening in the fires. There'll be people setting up, we'll provide you financial advice, and that happened in Townsville. Certainly, there was a drop-in centre where I could walk in, and a friendly accountant would give you advice. Well, you know what? That's not what we all needed. We don't need some faceless person telling us how to suck eggs. You want people around you who you know and trust that will just let you be you, and just sort of help you navigate it. So a lot of these rescue organisations and government things that came out really didn't meet community need, to be honest. Or I certainly didn't. A lot of them didn't meet my need. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure there are people out there that benefit, but like we had, and I'm sure it's happening down in the fires now, but we had a small business disaster centre. So a pop-up shop in an empty building, and 7 days a week at the start, any small business owner could walk in for advice.
Okay.
And it was general advice regarding what are the grants that are available, what are the loans that are available, how do you apply for them, we'll help you fill out the forms, what things can you think about. So they were there, and I used them a couple of times just to help with some technicalities. And I just remember one of them saying, "Oh, you seem to know about all this already." So, I was hoping you'd tell me more. So it's some of it's useful, some of it's not.
Okay, so it sounds like just in describing, if we were sort of putting together a bit of a plan and saying to somebody who's just recently experienced a disaster, and at the moment, our mind is with the bushfire disasters in Victoria and New South Wales, but just as a general rule, we're sort of saying these are the areas that we probably need to cover. And just looking at that list, they're certainly not all GP. So I'd suggest to you that logistics, Medicare, all that kind of stuff probably comes from an experienced practice manager, that's run a large practice. So more like an operations manager as a support, even for your PM. So not all decisions go through you would kind of be an optimal arrangement. So that's one sort of thing. The finance person could come from any background, really, I think. That doesn't necessarily have to be from health, I would have thought. Having somebody in that will just get on the tools is important and gives you a little bit of time and space to do the stuff that, as an owner, you still have to do, don't you? Like, unfortunately, the ECG machine, the final call on that still has to come from you, doesn't it? To use that example. And the person that's checking on welfare, again, could be anybody, but ideally somebody outside of that community that's not kind of managing their own stress and issues. Is there anything else that you think you needed, or and I get your point above here. You got to choose the right personality. It's got to be high trust, and they've got to be responsive. That's really important. Anything else you think that people need or might need?
Yeah, I mean it's overused, but it's the idea of having your own GP or just having your own contact person. And so for the first time, where it's hard to find a GP in town that I didn't know enough that I did feel comfortable with. So just being accountable as a patient, actually, for medical people is important. And so checking in. So I just checked in with a new GP that I'd started a relationship with, saying, listen, I think I'm okay, but this is what's going on. Yeah. And I guess being accountable to your own health in that way, and your own psychological health is important. But no, that's a good time. And as you say, it's got to be somebody outside the area, because they're often dealing with their own stuff and making fatigue.
I think this keep talking, mate. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, no. It's just, as you said, we were saying before, it's about finding the right mix of people. And one of the big things that we talked about finance, again, there were a whole lot of moments where I felt weight was lifted off my shoulders. One of them was where my bank manager that manages the finances for my bank, and I will give them a plug, was BOQ specialist that we worked with. He actually flew up within a week, put on his gum boots, and came into my practice with me, around with me. And he, as we walked out, he just said to me, he said, "Michael, I'm under strict instructions that we give you whatever you need." He said, "Don't worry about the servicing. Don't worry about what your cash flow is. Just tell us what you need."
Yeah. Okay.
And that was just an immense, because, you know, I was driving around a car, and all of us, you know, my car, and I noticed that the floor, my feet were starting to get wet, and it turned out the car was flooded worse than I thought. And they said, no, you've got to stop driving immediately. And then, of course, you know, with a big family, called up the bank manager. Just tell me which car you want, you know,
Right.
and we'll just get it approved. And within, you know, 3 days it was approved, and I had it.
Okay.
You know, that kind of partnership, I guess. Not every bank manager can give it, but it's invaluable. So
Yeah.
them.
Awesome. I think, you know, the purpose of this is not to get any recommendations other than practical advice. But one thing that I always say is, you know, you never find out how good insurers, bankers, all these people are until you get advice. And we'll touch on the insurers in a moment. But, you know, just listening to you talk reminds me of that, you know, that palliative care kind of advice where you've got the person at the centre and they're allowed to share their stress outwards. So people should always be unloading to the circle outside of them. So I think in the disaster, you know, if the red zone's the person in the middle of it, obviously there's a little bit you can unload to people nearby, but the zone that we want to focus on for the emotional support is this one, the green zone, where people are not getting a lot of stress themselves. And as long as they're always unloading out, it means that stuff is not going back into the people that are suffering at the time. And I think that model, I remember hearing that someone described that in palliative care, and I thought that's just a neat articulation of exactly how it should work. And I think it sounds like disasters are the same, you know. Make sure that have similarities anyway. Now I wanted to get back to this part, to the pre. This part is really interesting. So, you know, what I've heard you talk about is your experience, and I think it's fair to say, Michael, there probably wasn't a GP, you know, Australia-wide that had done more training in, you know, prevention, awareness, etc., than you, just because of your training is pretty unusual coming into being a community general practitioner. And so I'm fascinated by the bit before, you know, so somebody like you who knew a fair bit about it, like you were talking about, you know what, this area we live in, I love it, but it's prone to certain types of disasters. I'm keen to know, to explore this little bit prior to the event, and just see what lessons do you have that you could share with people about what they could do to try and improve their responsiveness or ability to respond to a disaster.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I get, yeah. I mean, and a lot of military GPs have set up their own practices, and I think the military, you know, disaster medicine is core business for us. But you know, as is, you know, recovering people after war. But so yeah, had a really good understanding of what to expect, and, you know, how long it takes for first responders. You know, when AAA weren't answering calls for the first, you know, 6 hours to some of my neighbours, that didn't surprise me. You know, when, you know, it took 24 hours for the military helicopters to start coming in and doing things, you know, that's normal. You know, so. I'm inherently risk averse, so very obviously, and I've done some corporate governance work. So we always talk about the black swan, and, you know, black swan events, and, you know, what can you do to prepare for the unpreparable or the unpredictable, and that's always formed a part of my business ethos as well. So very deliberately, we opened a second practice as a risk mitigator, because first practice was going well, and really well. And then we had some other offers about expanding. Took me a while to feel ready for it, but the decision making there was, well, a second practice in another site means I can buffer staff across the two. I can buffer resources, patients, if one's busy, the other one might not be because they're quite different demographics, share the income. Little did I know that I needed that buffer so quickly. It was something like 3 weeks after I opened up the second practice that we had the floods. Wow. So that was a planned risk mitigator that paid off, because, you know, tell you what, if we didn't have that second practice, every one of my staff would have been terminated. I would have wrapped up shop, and you know, it would have been a very different disaster. You know, because there's only so much you can do. Like other practices that, oh yeah, we'll host your staff for a little while, or, you know, we'll have your nurse. And so I did a little bit of that, you know, at the time of the disaster, was trying to say, is there anybody that wants to employ my nurse temporarily while I get my feedback on? I had to find, rehome my registrars because my new practice didn't have enough room for everybody. So yeah, so the risk mitigation was definitely part of the pre. The other thing that I did, I'm a big fan of the idea that you have to have diversified income, not just for your practice, but for yourself. So that's always been my personal approach, is that as a practice, if you rely wholly on Medicare rebates coming through your system, that's a risky approach. Because, well, number one, I don't think the feds are investing enough into it, and I don't think they will. So we're a mixed billing practice, so that's one of the things that I do. We did do a bit of cosmetics, but we also do other things like non-Medicare work. I've got contracts to do outreach work. That's non-Medicare money that comes into the practice as cash flow. And that was that's always been part of the business plan, non-Medicare, multiple sources of income, not because I thought, oh, what do I do if the practice floods, but more that, you know, as a practice, you can't rely on one source. And then as an individual, I've always been risk averse. And so I didn't want all of my family's income to come from just the one practice. And so I dabble in other things. I've got board work that I'm paid for. I still have a part-time position with Queensland Health that I still maintain, which is salary job. And tell you what, there's no better time to be a public servant than in the middle of a disaster, because that pay still keeps coming through. And so for me as an individual, it was no, having that extra income stream helped. So that enabled me to not actually see patients for a while. Because tell you what, if financially I was forced to see patients in the midst of trying to do all that stuff, it was so my pre-disaster planning always included that. And then there's the typical stuff that every practice is supposed to do as part of accreditation. You know, we had disaster plans. We knew what we'd do if we had to close down, if we lost electricity, if the practice was destroyed. We had off-site backups for our data, which we used. It's interesting though, we always talk about these offsite backups and, you know, changing it every day or two, or, you know, it should be every day. But we did that, and we had a backup that was 24 hours old, but you actually want the stuff that's fresh. You don't, so we actually waded through the water to get the server, which was placed high.
Right,
we deliberately placed the server high, as you do. So we actually waded through the water because we actually wanted the data, you know, before the backup was done. So, so we were able to get that, which is good. So yeah, the backups, you know, always check your backups, because they don't always work. You know, do actually run through what you do and is it actually working. I'm
amazed by how many people don't do that. So I've had those conversations with a lot of GPs. So we'll put that on the action list. Check your backups.
We actually got a little bit burnt. I got a little bit burnt. When I walked into the practice, there was mold growing on anything that wasn't metal, really, you know, and so all the paper, you know, Murtagh would, you know, be horrified with how his textbook looked by the time I was able to get into my practice. And so there was all this moldy, damp paper, and I just sort of looked around and said, well, I can't, you know, do I give this potentially contaminated? We're all worried about sewage. Do I give this to the nurse and ask them to treat it carefully to see what we need to keep, we don't? And so sort of made the OH&S decision, no, we're going to get rid of it. And of course, you can't get rid of medical in confidence details in the bin. So I had to go and hire contact a ShredX or whoever it was. You know, I need a bin outside the flooded practice to dispose of confidential waste. But then it turns out that there are a few people that had given us medical documents that hadn't yet been scanned in, that now are totally lost to the ether, you know, immunisation records and things like that. So we weren't really prepared for that. You know, as a practice, we weren't really accountable for making sure that if we took a hold of somebody's paperwork, that it sort of formed part of our disaster, you know, save this in case of disaster. Because in particular, it did affect one of our patients who was a traveller and who was from overseas, and so they brought the only copy from overseas into the practice, and then it was destroyed. And you know, to a certain extent, there's things outside of our control and in our control, but this affected that patient in quite a way. So having a little bit of an idea of, you know, when we accept things and paperwork, and whether it's products, I mean, obviously vaccines that we lost in the fridge, I just had to rebuy for the patient. But how do you know what you do? Because we don't wade, you know, the vaccines were in mud. So we didn't sort of go through and say, oh yes, Mr. Smith, we owe him a rabies vaccine. You just sort of have to chuck it all out carefully. So having some, I guess being aware of what's patient owned that's in your practice would be good, in case, you know, the disaster does happen. But and as you say, digital is good, because we had backups for all that stuff. But being aware of, you know, what might be sitting, and the staff items as well, just being aware of what was there. I made a commitment to replace any of my staff that had left stuff in their cupboards made a commitment to replace the big equipment, big ticket items that they'd lost. But if you're a contractor and everything's lost, well, and if you've got your $2,000 dermatoscope and your whatever other equipment, does the contractors have insurance against that themselves?
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what type of things you replace for staff? I'm interested in that.
More out of emotional guilt than anything. Because one of my registrars had just bought herself a whiz-bang dermatoscope, and for a registrar, that was quite a big hit. So I wanted to replace that. And a couple of my staff had their whiz-bang stethoscopes, and what was that? Something else. And I just thought, no, let me get it for you. I feel bad. I'm not sure. There wasn't too much loss, but there were personal things like certificates and anything up on the walls we could save, which was good. But people lost personal items. Obviously, and in the fires, the people down there who lose everything. I mean, that's just a whole nother story.
It is. Yeah, it is, isn't it? Cloud storage means that you can have copies of most things, at least, even important things on the walls, etc. Photos don't cost you anything to upload to the cloud. And so, that just might be one of the to-dos, which is a bit of a more active record of what matters to you.
Yeah.
Can we spend a little bit of time on insurance? I'm sorry to save the biggest trauma to the end.
Well, so talking about trauma, I was having this discussion with another, was it a business owner or a person? No, a non-medical person.
Yeah.
For us in Townsville, the trauma wasn't the flood. The trauma was dealing with people after the flood.
Right. Okay.
Most of us can rationalise that bad things happen. Especially natural disasters. Most of us can park that part of our brain that says, you know what, this was really bad, but it is what it is, and let's just get on with it. What we're traumatized by is the discussions that happen afterwards, the people, the opportunism. Everything went up 20%. So any tradie's price instantly went up 20%. My builder, who helped me rebuild, who's a friend of mine, said, listen, Michael, I'm doing this, at cost for you, but just so you know, everybody that I'm calling to come in and help you rebuild your practice has quoted me a price that I know is 20% above what it was, a month ago. Opportunism in terms of, that somebody said, oh, the hygienist won't sign off your place until you've ground the concrete, because everything had to get ripped up, to get rid of the bacteria. I said, what bacteria? I said, it's been sterilised. They spray chemicals on it. They put dryers in for 2 weeks to dry everything up. And they said, oh, no, the hygienist says you're a medical practice and they won't sign you off until you've paid these people $2,000 to come in and grind the concrete. Now, of course, I didn't have insurance. At this stage, I didn't think I was getting insurance. So I was counting the cents. I said, what do you mean? No, I'm not treating patients on the floor. We're going to be putting glue and lino and we don't operate on the floor. Oh, no, you will not be allowed back into your practice unless you pay this $2,000 grinding.
Wow.
So there was an awful lot of opportunism going on. I was dressed as a tradie going into my practice, doing all the cleanup, and I was walking with a group of them and they're all chatting, hey fellas, isn't this fantastic? This is going to be so great for us. And I'm just, sitting there shaking my head, So that really hurt the people that were taking advantage. People still want to be paid, like in the midst of everything, the people that I leased, I won't use names, but the people that I leased my printers and photocopiers said, oh, where's our printers and photocopiers? I said, well, you can come and pick them up if you want. They come and, oh, you've lost them. Okay, well, here's the bill for the full replacement cost, because as part of your lease agreements, you need to, and you can't keep paying us because you're not using it. You need to give us, $20,000 for the equipment. I'm like, well, number one, I'm not insured. Number two, not a good faith, not a good taste, talk about, give me some time. And I won't name other groups, but even in the midst of all that, people still want to be paid. And not talking about patients, I'm talking about, people that you do business with. And you just think, come on, fellas, because it's normally guys that I was dealing with, give me a break. So that hurt. I expected to be flood covered. So I called them up while the flood waters were still up and I said, I need to make a claim for my practice. 24 hours later, they called back saying, oh, no, didn't you know flood was excluded on your insurance policy. I said, well, no, I didn't.
Wow.
You know, I took out the gold package, took out everything. I doubled the build cost, and, you know, was insured for that. I'd insured for predicted future income, not what I was actually earning. So my profit and continuity insurance cover was way overestimated compared to what I was actually earning at that time. You know, I thought I'd took out the best insurance, but in page 7 of 90 pages of documents, there was a line that said flood was excluded.
Wow.
And I admit that I missed that. When I look back through my emails, it was 2 days before we were due to open that they emailed me and said, "Oh, here's a package for you. Pay here, you know, $4,000, and you've got insurance."
Yep.
Oh, okay, yep, that's what I need, and moved on to my next problem.
Uh-huh.
So certainly, absolutely accept responsibility for the fact that I should have read all through every one of those pages and made an individual decision about each line item of the 90 pages, but I didn't. And so the insurers came in and said, listen, we do accept that there was some stormwater that came down from the roof. So we took lots of photos of that. But we say that, you know, most of the damage will be from floodwater, which came up, which you're not covered for. And so that's when the stress really started, to be honest, because if our houses were insured, and, you know, the insurance claimant came within a few days of the floodwaters clearing, said, don't worry, you're covered for everything. You've got more than enough. Just tell us what you need. And you know, that was relaxing almost. But the practice with all these bills coming in, you know, the landlord still wanted his rent. Of course he does.
Yep.
And I tried to break lease, and they said, no, we'll hold you to your lease. You know, if you're going to break lease, we want the $1.5 million up front now. You know,
wow.
So, you know, those dealings was the stressful part. The trauma was that, you know, I've still got people who are out of their house, families that are my patients. They're still out of their house because they're arguing with the insurers. The brokers are arguing about cost. You know, not the brokers, the assessors. You know, you know, a rebuild, the assessor will say, well, our own person has quoted us 100,000, your builder's quoted 200,000. Well, we're going to go with our builder. And then you think, well, what are they missing? You know?
Yeah.
And so we've got all these people in dispute. So the trauma's coming from that. You know, it's not coming from the fact that they lost everything. It's coming from people not doing what you want. The other thing that I'll talk about with insurance is the time that it takes. I was a bit naive at the start, to be honest. I sort of thought, you know, in the week afterwards, I thought, okay, well, I'll just wait till the insurance gives me the final decision, because they accepted stormwater in the top, but not the flood. I'll just wait and before I decide whether, well, number one, whether I'll reopen at all. Versus rebuild versus, you know, bankruptcy was a discussion with the accountant. What does bankruptcy look like? You know, and, you know, it was off the table, but it was, you know, you know, you've got to think about all your options.
Comprehensive.
But you know what? It was 9 months before the insurance actually gave me a decision.
Wow.
And the Fed government stepped up with the state government pretty quick. So when the disaster first happened, I think we were given access to $5,000 up front as a grant, and then $25,000 total. That very quickly got up to 50 grand, and I've heard them use the 50 grand figure for what's going on in the fires. And that sounds lovely. And that's, you know, that's ScoMo, you know, up there saying we're going to give 50 grand to small business owners. What he doesn't talk about is the actual paperwork. And yes, we were given 25 grand up front. All you had to do was prove loss and sign to say that you're intending on rebuilding. And they actually gave the 25 grand, no questions answered. But the other 25 grand would only be released after you prove that insurance wouldn't cover it. And so you can't get the other 25 grand until the 9 months later when the insurer has done it. So cash flow is absolutely the major issue in that first few months. You know, the government offers a loan, low interest loan, disaster loans, and I'm sure it'll be opened up for the fires. You know, we can get up to 250,000, I think, at 0.4% with the first 3 or 4 years interest only, and then pay back. So, you know, that's pretty darn good, actually. But I got the application form, and it's 10 pages, and I talked to my accountants, and it's got everything to do with your cash flow. Number one, you've got to sign to say that you couldn't get it through commercial means. So you've got to go to your banks first and have them refuse you. So it's not, which
has other issues later, right? You know, so when you've been declined for a loan, that does have impacts on you later on. So
so it's messy, and it takes time. And so, and to be honest, my bank, my bank did come through very quickly with the loan approval to rebuild. But what I was doing was taking out a new, at commercial rates, loan to rebuild a practice that I'd only just built 4 years earlier, that I was still paying off. At commercial rates, you know, and with a full cost, with no hope of insurance, no promise of insurance at all or recovery. So, yeah, even if you've got insurance, and I was warned off. I was told that after Cyclone Debbie did a fair bit of damage, a couple of hours drive south of us, and I was told that some insurers were taking 2 years before paying out their businesses.
Wow.
So, and I think that's good. I can tell you that will happen to the people in the fires, even if you are insured. It doesn't come tomorrow. You know, that you've got to be really prepared for that cash flow stress.
Yeah, that's outrageous, isn't it? Okay, well, look, there's a fair bit you've unpacked there, and I just, if I could, would like to go through the action list with you, see if there's any missing, and then if we can, I'd like to circle back to how the community is travelling now. So one of the first things you put there was get a brains trust, and we talked about a few things, and particularly the attributes of that group. Taking time out for yourself. I put in there community love because I think, you know, your point about the first people that you thought maybe the first wave were in fact there for you. I think that's important for us. Psychologist for personal support, I think, is a great bit of advice. You happen to be doing some training to upskill yourself, but you found that it was more valuable internally as well as externally. Run through your backups, and one thing I always advise people is actually try and work from a restored copy as a test to make sure that it can happen. One of the learnings from all the stuff that people leave there is, wherever possible, digitize it and give it back would be a reasonable approach to take. Check what's patient-owned, GP-owned and staff-owned. I guess it's a matter of sort of pragmatism here, encouraging people to take that stuff with them, you know, just not leave it in the practice is probably not a bad habit, because I know that in our clinics we've had things stolen, and you know, that provides, like you said, I've always taken the view that we should replace it, even though that's not technically what happens, but it just creates a level of discomfort with that. So encouraging people to take that stuff home is probably not a bad policy, and remind people that, you know, it's probably not the most secure environment to leave things around in the medical facility. And then the insurance issues we've sort of gone through there, that there's often these sort of the premium that applies in the rebuild phase. Make sure that you've got the most comprehensive cover. Read the fine print, kind of obvious, but insurance companies are the people that it's written about. You know, the big print giveth and the small print taketh away. The shifty buggers that they are, and the overwhelm of paperwork, expectations of when it can be sorted can be 6 to 12 months, sometimes 2 years, which is a shocker. Cash flow is the issue, and expect a lot of mess. So I think that the messy part comes back to digitizing everything and being well organized, doesn't it? Because it just means you can get your hands on things a little bit more quickly, and sticking it all in the cloud. Anything you'd add to that list, mate? Anything else when you see that list that you think, you know what, we need to put in there?
Oh, the only other thing I'd add is what's your legal recourse if things have gone pear-shaped? So they're often, our community is certainly talking about class actions, you know, against the council for managing the flood. And, you know, I'm not really pursuing that, but I'll take part if something happens. There were lots of town hall type meetings and small business owner meetings and things like that, where we were given opportunities to talk to the powers that be. Insurers and the brokers that sell the insurance operate under a legislative framework. They've got actual responsibilities. They've got a duty of care in what they do. And there is the Ombudsman, the AFCA Ombudsman, Australian Financial Complaints Authority, which is a national authority where to deal with cases where the individual feels that the broker or the insurer has failed in their duty of care. Know about them, learn about them. If you're not happy with something that your broker or insurer or assessor has done, be aware of what your avenues of challenging are. And so I'm in the process of that. So it's still 12 months on, and I'm still dealing with AFCA in regarding a complaint that I've raised against the broker. So, you know, be aware of what your backup plans are. I've also, you know, I did, of course, and you should, got independent legal advice as well through this, you know, independent legal advice regarding HR responsibilities, but also even regarding the medical records, you know, well, when we had to destroy them, that was a little bit of a chat. But and just in terms of legal, in terms of is there anybody you can sue? You know, mainly, you know, I'm never ever been litigious, but when, you know, you're the one that's facing financial disasters, you've got to use whatever's that you're entitled to.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And as you rightly pointed out above there, you know, people are taking the piss somewhat with what they're doing, and so it's only reasonable that you have to equalise. Again, it's legal, so you've got to use the legal avenues that are available to you. Okay, let's maybe talk. I think that's great, and if there's anything you think of, let me know. We'll just add it to the list. But let's talk about it. You know, we mentioned earlier that it's almost, if not exactly, you know, within a day of the 12-month anniversary. So could we talk a little bit about, you know, the community and your practice recovery, maybe?
Yeah. So 12 months on, I'm able to look at the good bits and the bad bits, not just the bad bits now. My connection with my community, my patients, and my understanding of my role as a GP and a GP practice owner, and my role in helping the community rebuild has, you know, blown my mind. You know, in terms of, I guess, you know, my disaster training was military, and we fly in and fly out. You know, we hop on the ground for a little while and then we go again. That's how we're trained. But actually being embedded in the community, our role as a GP in being an anchor point for people to come see each other, to, you know, and don't forget, my patients are coming to check on me, but they're coming to check on my staff too. You know, they were in, you know, talking to my receptionists, my nurses. You know, we are part of the community. You know, we're not a government service. You know, we're not a Centrelink office that opens our doors and says, you know, come and see us for X, Y, Z. We are family. And so that has really grown strong. You know, our patient loyalty, because they knew that they knew I was personally fighting to reopen, that it was hard work to reopen. It wasn't just a matter of me signing a few documents and insurance coming in and rebuilding everything. They know how hard I worked to get back open again. So that community connection, you can't put a value on, and that's one of the massive benefits that's come out. And so the loyalty to my practice and my brand name is wonderful. There was a practice near us, another private practice very close to us, that flooded along with us, and they're not reopening. So they are corporate owned, and their corporates made the decision that no, it wasn't worth rebuilding, because, you know, for whatever, you know, assessment they have provided. And so I got one of their doctors and all of their patients. You know, they moved to a different site that was well away from us. And so some of their doctors went with them to a new site. But that's been great for our business. So our patient dependency skyrocketed since then. And so there is opportunity in disaster if you're ready for it. And so And I guess the connection to community, the hard work that I did to try and advocate for my community, those that know me know that I'm a bit of a media tart. Somebody calls up from the news and says, we want to talk to you. And I said, yeah, sure. And then once they arrive, I said, now what do you want to talk about? My community advocacy role is very deliberate, because I felt that a lot of my patients and other small business owners in the shopping centre don't have the same willingness to voice my opinion as I do. And so I found that I needed to talk on behalf of my patients in terms of some of the stress that they're finding and some of the insurance battles, but also talk about other small business owners. That helped. And, you know, I'm very pleased, you know, we've doubled, we've done very well in terms of recruiting more doctors, and we're full up now. I wasn't full up before the floods, and we're full up now.
Yeah.
You know, this next 12 months is going to be wonderful. I did say that 12 months and 1 week ago, but the next 12 months are going to be fantastic. You know, everything's very settled in that respect. So, you know, listen, there has been growth from this, you know, both business-wise, personal-wise, my connection to my staff. My staff have always known that paying them salary and keeping them has been my priority. I did have to let one person go, which broke my heart, and we did have some people due to start that I couldn't continue employment with. But 12 months on, I've brought that person on that I couldn't start with just after the floods. Wow. Every one of my staff that had a job at the start, except for the one, was paid throughout that whole period and worked. Which is an achievement in my mind, I guess. And so my staff know that I've got that loyalty and commitment to them. And my staff even voluntarily offered to reduce their hours during that period as well. I took up one of them or two of them on that offer, where they just voluntarily reduced their part-time hours to support the business. The loyalty from the staff now is fantastic. We've got a great team. And as I said, the connection to the community, we still talk about floods. Every day we're talking about something. You know, we've had a rain event in the last week. You know, the rivers are rising, the lake's rising again. People are quite smart about it though, and so there's no panic, but they're bringing it up. You know, it's still there.
Yeah, right.
And if we have another flood event, you'll find people gone. My suburb, which was the one that was hit, we've probably still got 25% of houses, 1 in 4 houses are still vacant, not rebuilt.
Wow.
It's not rebuilt. They're vacant because they're not rebuilt, not because people don't want to move back in. There's a lot of commitment to come back. But, you know, based on people's own personal life experiences before the flood event, some did leave and won't come back, left Townsville permanently. Others left to other suburbs and will stay there. But seeing people walk the streets again and around the lake has been wonderful. So it's a long time, and they're fire affected areas. You know, I feel it. I mean, don't get me wrong. The trauma of the fire and the life threatening, I can't even begin to imagine. But for the business owners there, they've got a hard road ahead.
Indeed. And these aren't your words. So what I've just read there is listening to you, having listened to and read Brené Brown. What you're describing is very much, her, what she'll describe as, vulnerable leadership and creating a psychologically safe space. That's from somebody like you who, I know you well enough to say you're very well organised, very well structured. This was probably the side of you that your staff didn't necessarily see prior to, and so that loyalty comes out of what you give to them, and just being open and honest. Like you said, being able to not employ somebody was really stressful for you. So your commitment was that you would do your best to look after them. I think that's pretty amazing. And, you ought to be commended on that style of leadership. It's not easy to do, but, what you're describing, the business growth and benefit out of that, which wasn't your intent for doing it. I understand that. It was about, you thought it was the right thing to do, is pretty cool. And I think that's actually a really good frame for people. Obviously can't occur straight away, but how you behave in times of crisis, people feel like they know you really well.
Good summary. Thank you.
Well done, mate. Okay, is there anything else you'd like to add before we wind up and you get to the cherubs behind you?
Yes, right. So I had lots of time for reflection. I always knew there'd be a time that I'd look back and think about how I've grown. I'm probably getting there. I wasn't ready to look at that. Some key things that came out for me that most of us know, like if you ask us academically, you would say it, but I feel it. GPs in the community, we are so important. We're such a core part of what we do. We're so, the Centre of Excellence Hospital down the road, they do wonderful work, but they're episodic in nature. That they only wanted to see the worst of the worst during the worst times that they had. They were putting the barriers up, saying, "Don't come to us." They only wanted to deal with the worst of the worst. They rely on the GPs out there, doing the most of the work. To be honest, doing really the most of the work because they wanted to save themselves for the, broken arms and limbs and all that stuff. Our connection, our personal relationship that we develop with our patients is part of their healing, and that's one of the beauties of being. And I'm sure you get it in urban areas, but in smaller towns, it's maybe more recognised or more talked about. That in regional, rural, and remote towns, that connection can feel a lot more present. But as I said, I know it happens in urban towns. So it's again, I guess it spurred me on in terms of advocacy and making sure that federal government, state governments recognise the role of the GP. That they fund us. This whole coronavirus thing. They're not funding us for this. They expect us to do it out of the good of the heart. And I did, a whole lot of the work I did was unpaid for, the evacuation centres, obviously. So I think we've got some more work to do there. The fires have given us some more work. I guess I've been inspired, especially now that my head's getting better space, I've been inspired to do more work. And with RSCGB Rural Council, I'm hoping to step up and contribute there and apply some of the experiences that I've just had and use them in a way that's going to further the GP voice. and recognition for that. And, you know, we whinge, well, we often whinge about not getting enough federal recognition in terms of money, but our patients value us. They really, really do.
Yeah.
That's one of the beauties of what we do.
Real privilege, isn't it, that part? Awesome, mate. Anything else there that you would like to add?
No, that's a good way of summing. I should archive this somewhere so that, you know, when I'm in my nursing home resting and think about what did I do in my life, I can think, oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, there was a bit of water.
That's right. It's guarding against dementia. What we'll do, mate, is we'll make sure that we post this on YouTube so it's accessible to essentially whoever wants it. I mean, I think the purpose of today was really to unpack one person's experience, and our goal with this is purely to help other people and provide a resource for them. They can use it as they see fit. Mate, I'm really grateful for your time and sharing what is an incredibly difficult experience. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll let you know and others know when it's up, and then we can get to sharing it. So
sounds good.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks, Todd. Thanks for your help.
And have a good one.
Yeah, thanks. Talk to you later.
Bye.